Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Practice Discipleship Initiative webinar series. My name is Dawn Troutman. I am your host for this series, and I'm coming to you from the Metro New York Synod today. You may know me from the Extravaganza, our event that I will talk about a little bit later, or as a Lutheran life coach. So I'm happy to be with you here today. This initiative is a dynamic partnership between the ELCA Youth Ministry Network, the ELCA and its youth gathering, and ELCA seminaries and colleges. As you may have heard in Todd Bugler's blog post, Todd Bugler is the executive director of the Youth Ministry Network. Practice Discipleship is taking a small hiatus for 2017. The network is developing a new strategic plan and wants Practice Discipleship to be a strategic part of that. So you can read the whole blog post. The address is right down there at the bottom, elcaymnet.wordpress.com. So you will definitely stay updated on that if you're part of any of our publications or our social media channels. The theme for this year is Wonder. There will be a series of 7 webinars that focus on Lutheran theology, ministry theory, and practical skills relating to our theme. Today we are at the final one, Wondering at Creation. Our presenter is Reverend Dr. Brian Peterson, Professor of New Testament at Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary. You will be able to ask questions and make comments as we go. If you look on the left side of your screen, there's a box with a place to type in questions. I'll keep an eye on that so that I can ask your questions in the broadcast. We'll also have a longer time for questions at the end, but ask them when you think of them so we've got them, or save them toward the end. And with that, I want to welcome you all, and welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much. This webinar is, I think, a little bit different from the other sessions in this year's curriculum. What I want to do is not so much a presentation on how to get youth to wonder at creation. Instead, I want to make a few comments about why that kind of wonder is important for faith and for faith development. And then the bulk of what I want to do will, I hope, actually evoke some sense of wonder. That is, I don't intend just to speak about wonder, but to actually engage in doing some of it.
I love it. Let's do it.
Good. Luther, where else would we start but Martin Luther? Luther once said that God writes the gospel not in the Bible alone, but on trees and flowers and clouds and stars. There are some very good reasons, I think, why we tend to put our church camps in the mountains, or by a lake, or on a beach. Contemplating God's glory and God's mercy, or thinking about what it means for us to be humans who are created and called by God, those thoughts seem to come more easily to us when we are surrounded by that unmistakable grandeur of creation. Science has given us even more reason to wonder at the world in which we live by telling us, among other things, that long story of the universe's birth and development and the profound cosmic interconnections. For centuries, for most of the church's life, theology and science were very good colleagues. And that makes some sense. After all, they both pursue the truth about the world. But a few hundred years ago, with the Enlightenment, the two became a bit more separated, and that's a trend that I'm afraid has grown deeper over the past century or so. Too often, people in our culture now seem to assume that science and faith are always in opposition to one another. Of course, we know that's not true, and we as the church need to do a better job of making that clear. After all, we live in a culture that is profoundly shaped by scientific concerns and scientific perspectives. That is the context in which we are called to discipleship and in which we engage in mission, and so I think that we cannot ignore that. I think that this separation between faith and a scientific understanding of the world, that separation has stunted the church's ability to communicate with the rest of the world around us. And I also think that it makes it more difficult for the youth in our congregations to connect their faith with the world in which they live. A recent Barna Group study showed that one of the top 5 or 6 reasons that young people are leaving the church in these times is because they say the church seems antagonistic towards science. And so the church seems to them to be out of touch with the world in which they live. So we who might be in the role of mentors for those youth, we need to do a more deliberate and creative and explicit job in declaring that scientific knowledge about the universe on the one hand and the church's confession about God as the creator on the other hand are not opposed to one another. So this session, I hope, is going to explore how wondering at creation, and especially wondering at the great big universe, can be an important and enriching part of our faith. And by the way, this image that you're seeing now, it's what's left after the explosive death of a supernova star a long time ago. And we'll talk more about that and what that might mean to us a bit later. This more colorful image is a picture of a stellar nursery where new stars are being formed. And as we move along through this presentation, it might be useful to keep in mind that all of the big red clouds in space are places where new stars are being born. But these last 2 pictures, one of a stellar death and the other of stellar birth, illustrate, I think, how our view of the universe has radically changed in just the last century. And I think that we have an obligation to help the people in our congregations, including the youth, to think and speak and live out faith in ways that do not ignore what we know about the world around us. I think that that is important if we're going to be able to engage in God's mission in the world and to the world in ways that are wise and faithful. I also think that it is important to make sure that our youth know that they don't have to choose between faith on the one hand and an informed intellect on the other. A primary point I want to make today is that a sense of wonder at creation is an important part of integrating faith with that understanding of the universe around us. A sense of wonder at creation, I think, is a key part of our being able to hear our own vocation and to understand our own mission as God's stewards of this good world. When we stop to consider what the universe is actually like, or even stop to look up into a clear, dark sky and see the Milky Way, if we're fortunate enough to live in a place where that's possible, I think that wonder is not hard to come by. The writer of Psalm 8 knew that. And in the words of the psalm, we hear that wondering at creation is a significant part of a healthy faith. So Psalm 8 says, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them?" At that point, it seems to me that Psalm 8 is an invitation to wonder at God's world, and to wonder at what it means to be a human in a universe like this. I think that a little bit of astronomy can inform and deepen our sense of wonder. So Psalm 8 invites us to wonder, and I think that part of that wonder comes from considering the sheer extent of space, and I want to do that with you for the next few minutes. It quickly becomes mind-boggling, and to even get a start on this realization of what the universe is like so that we can wonder at it, we have to shrink it down to a scale model. So I want you to imagine this scale model in your minds. This kind of exercise is certainly not original with me, but I do think it's useful. So if the sun, instead of being 865,000 miles in diameter, is shrunk down to the size of a grapefruit, then the Earth is a single grain of sand. And in your mind, I want you to think, where are you going to put that grain of sand? How far away from the grapefruit is it in this scale model? And take a quick guess for yourself. And the answer is about 35 feet away. So that gives you a start on sort of the scale of our little corner of the universe. Pluto, and I know Pluto isn't a planet anymore, but it's still pretty cool. Pluto would be an even smaller grain of sand, a quarter of a mile away from that grapefruit. So we're already getting something that looks pretty big. And what about the next nearest star? Where would the next grapefruit be? The closest one to our sun. And again, take a guess in your mind. And it would in fact be 1,600 miles away. And I hope that I can hear you gasp a little bit. If the sun were a grapefruit in my home in South Carolina, the next star would be a grapefruit in Colorado on our scale model. And again, that's a start toward understanding. Or maybe it's not understanding, maybe it's a start toward feeling just how big the universe is. In this tiny scale model we're building, the diameter of our Milky Way galaxy, which is almost everything you can see without a telescope, it would be 40 million miles across. And that's just our galaxy. Just 100 years ago, astronomers weren't sure that there were any other galaxies beyond our own. And now we know that there are a staggering number of them. At least 100 billion with a B, billion galaxies that we can see. And that means that the context for our faith, the context for our thinking about creation has radically changed in just the past few generations. And we need to catch up with that a little bit, I think. So here is the next biggest neighbor to our galaxy. This is the Andromeda galaxy. And like the Milky Way, it is a collection of hundreds of billions of stars. Even for our little scale model, where the sun is a grapefruit, this galaxy would be about 1 billion miles away. And I really cannot imagine what 1 billion miles are like. That's already gone past the numbers that seem real to me. The actual distance, of course, is even more mind-boggling. It takes 2.5 million years for light to make the trip from that galaxy to my telescope and the camera that caught the light and made this picture. Light traveling at 186,000 miles every second for 2.5 million years. In miles, that's 7 with 18 zeros after it. I think that's 7 million trillion miles, but that sounds like a made-up number. And so you can see why astronomers use light years as a distance. And that's our closest big galaxy. And there are hundreds of billions of other galaxies at far greater distance. Here's a galaxy a bit farther away at 12 million light years, but that's really still our next door neighbor in terms of the universe. This next one is 20 million light years away. And remember that all of those red areas are where stars are forming and being born. Or at least it's where the stars were forming 20 million years ago. Here's another one that is 29 million light years away. and this one is 35 million light years away. If you've ever seen the Milky Way under a really dark sky, you know that there are dark lanes running through it. That's the leftover dust and ash from stars that have burned out. The galaxy recycles that by collecting it in the arms of the galaxy. And what you see as that dark lane across the middle of the galaxy in this picture is the same thing that you see from the inside of our own galaxy if you're fortunate enough to get out under a night sky without too much light pollution. Here is what you might see, and you can notice the dark lanes running through our own galaxy as you look up in a dark sky like this. Well, here's another galaxy that is 40 million light years away. And with this next one, we take a big step. Here are 5 galaxies clustered together, 270 million light years away. And now we need to pause a minute and consider what that means. The size of the universe means that when we see stars and galaxies, we are looking back in time. When the light in this picture left those galaxies 270 million years ago, all of the continents we know on Earth today were joined together in one big landmass. The first fish with bones had just started to evolve. While this light traveled on its way to us at 186,000 miles every second, the dinosaurs evolved from those fish, and then the dinosaurs thrived and ruled the world, and then they went extinct, and still that light hadn't reached us. And I think, of course, we have trouble grasping this kind of scale. But that might be precisely the important point. Astronomy helps us expand our frame of reference. With telescopes and cameras and space probes, we are seeing things that all of the earlier generations of humanity never even knew existed. And rather than ignoring such new perspectives, or maybe feeling that our faith is somehow threatened by these scientific discoveries, we need to bring them into conversation with our faith. Children learn about the solar system and the stars when they are in grade school. But I wonder whether the church really does very much to help them understand their faith within the context of this universe. And without that connection, I think that their thinking about God will probably be stunted and distorted and disconnected from the world in which they actually live. One way that faith might be better shaped and deepened by a scientifically informed sense of wonder is that astronomy can remind us of the overflowing scale and the abundance and the variety of God's creative activity in ways that we're not. I think we're one slide ahead. Can we back up? There we go. In ways that were not possible to previous generations. We can see the excess of God's glory flung out in billions of galaxies like this one, flung out by an unrestrained and generous creator. We are called by God to enjoy that creation, to wonder at its depth and at its mystery, and we are called to care for our little corner of it. So again, I think that wondering at creation helps inform and nurture our sense of our calling as humans. And maybe we need this staggering scale of the universe to begin to think about what we mean when we talk about the everlasting faithfulness of God. So we live in an amazing time, a time when we can be aware of and we can wonder at such cosmic realities, and I don't think that we should waste that opportunity. But still, it might be easy to feel lost in a universe like this one. Many years ago now, when I was just about to enter into my teen years, I had a budding interest in astronomy. I shared that interest with my pastor's son, who was about my same age. And so I spent a good deal of time at their home. And I remember one day the pastor asked me if my interest in astronomy didn't make God seem very, very distant. And I remember being perplexed by that suggestion. I don't think that idea had ever occurred to me. Instead, looking into the night sky had the opposite effect, at least for me. It brought a sense of wonder, wonder not just at creation, but at the Creator. Faced with the deep night sky, the psalmist does not feel lost, but the psalmist celebrates that God cares about us. And Psalm 8 goes on to say, "You have made humans a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands." And so there is wonder expressed here in Psalm 8. Wonder at what it means to be a human being, and wonder at the vocation that God has given to us, to exercise wise dominion in the language of this psalm. There is also here in Psalm 8 wonder that God's love is so great and so vast that God does not lose us in all of this wide universe. The object you're looking at right now, by the way, is the sort of thing that forms when a star the size of our sun comes to the end of its life, as our sun will do in about 4 billion years. Our sun isn't quite big enough to blow up in a spectacular explosion. Instead, it more gently will exhale what it's cooked up inside. It will exhale that out into the galaxy again, just as the white cinder of a star at the middle of this object did several thousand years ago. This is part of the long narrative of the universe. Psalm 8 declares that even in that immense cosmic story, God remains faithful and God does not lose us. One thing that recent astronomy can teach us is that the universe actually does have a story. It seems to be going someplace. It changes. The idea that the universe is eternal and unchanging wasn't seriously questioned until the 18th century. But now we know that individual stars are dying and they're being born all the time. This picture is one of the astronomical objects mentioned in the Bible. This is the Pleiades, or maybe you know it as the Seven Sisters. It's a cluster of stars that formed together a few million years ago. And our sun probably formed in a similar cluster about 4.5 billion years ago, but our sibling stars have all scattered into the galaxy over those long years. In places like this one, and in places like this one, new stars are condensing out of these massive clouds of hydrogen and dust until they finally light up. And beyond the life cycle of individual stars, one thing that the discovery of the Big Bang makes clear is that the universe itself is changing and it's expanding. And the difficult part to grasp is that the universe isn't expanding into some large, empty space, but that space itself is expanding, sort of like a loaf of bread baking in the oven. And that means that new space is coming into existence all the time. The creation of the cosmos is continuing. God isn't done creating. There is more outer space today than there was yesterday. That's what an expanding universe means. And so one theologian suggested that we are living in the middle of God's unfinished sentence. God is in the process of saying, "Let there be a universe." And the unfinished story of creation is still being told, and we live in the middle of that. So I want you to think about what we mean when we say in the Creed that we believe in God, the creator of all that exists. If we think about creation happening only at one instant a long time ago, then we have not grasped what it means to confess God as the creator of all things. The creation of new things, new stars, new planets, new species of life is going on all the time. And that simply wasn't known just 200 years ago. And I think that maybe that realization can help us think more deeply about what we mean when we call God the creator, that creation continues. And that new realization might also help us notice some things about the biblical text that we hadn't noticed before. For example, Genesis 1 reports God saying, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the earth bring forth living creatures." The Genesis account sounds as though God gives to the world the freedom and the ability to produce new things, new life. God invites the water and the earth, in a sense, to be God's partners in creating and bringing life forth. We see that working its way out both in terms of the evolution of life on this planet, as new forms of life do emerge from the ocean and from the land. And I think we see it in a larger cosmic sense in how the universe is still producing new things. Not by God stepping in to suspend physics and miraculously manipulating things, but just by the universe doing what God made it to do so well. This picture, by the way, is two galaxies in the process of merging together, and over the course of several million years, developing into something new, a larger, more mature galaxy. So astronomy might remind us that God's creative work continues, and we are called to be partners. We are called to be co-creators with God, in part by living out lives of justice and mercy. And I think that that's the vision of vocation that we want to instill in our youth, that God is still involved in growth and development and new things, and that our youth are a part of that unfolding plan of God. Perhaps the wonder that we feel at the universe around us and at its story of change and development can help us realize also that the journey that God takes with the world is longer and it is more patient than we usually imagine. I think we can get a better sense of that when we look at the stars and when we listen to astronomers. So science can tell us the story of the universe's birth and its long development, and then we as the church, in faith and in wonder, need to tell that as the story of a loving creator. And of course, it is our story too. After the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, and by the way, this is not a picture of the Big Bang, it's a supernova that people in China noticed as a suddenly bright star about 1,000 years ago. And that shredded star stuff has been spreading out ever since then. But it looks like an explosion, so I thought I would use it here. But after the Big Bang, things finally cooled down enough after several 100,000 years for atoms to form. And at that point, for the next hundreds of millions of years, the whole universe was made up of hydrogen and helium and a little bit of lithium, just those three lightest elements. That's all that managed to condense before the pieces had spread apart too far for heavier things to form. What that means is that everything else in the universe was formed inside those nuclear furnaces that we call stars. Whether stars were huge and met their end in gigantic supernova explosions, like this one, or in the more gentle puffing out of a star the size of our sun, and this is the sort of thing that it will go through. Either way, the dying stars spread out the old bits of stuff that they have cooked up inside, and that scattered star material will condense and form the next generation of stars and solar systems that have heavier things like oxygen and iron and carbon. So what that means is that the elements that make up our bodies were all created inside stars. We are connected to the rest of the universe. As astronomer Carl Sagan said a few decades ago, we are all made of recycled stardust. The Genesis creation accounts also insist on our connection with the rest of creation. For example, in Genesis 1, humans are created on the sixth day along with all of the other animals. There is a sense there in Genesis 1 that we are in fact related to the animals, that we share something profound and important with them. It seems to me that the insights of evolution point in the same direction. And in Genesis 2, humans, and in Hebrew the word for human is Adam, that's where we get the name Adam. Humans, Adam, are made from the dirt, and the Hebrew word for dirt is Adamah. So there is a bit of a play on words here in the Genesis text. Adam is made from the Adamah. And the point in Genesis 2 is that humans come from the stuff of the earth. We belong together. We belong to the earth. Modern astronomy also insists on the interconnectedness of all things, that deep connection between stars and galaxies and the atoms that make up our bodies. Maybe pictures like this one are so captivating because at a deep level, they remind us that we are connected to the rest of the universe, and we carry the history of that universe in the atoms that make up our bodies. Here's another example of stars recycling things into the galaxy so that new things can come into being. We should not be surprised by the fact that the universe is so interconnected. I think there are good theological reasons for suspecting that that should be the case. Isn't that kind of interconnection exactly what we should expect in a universe in which God comes to join us in the incarnation? John 1 says that in Jesus God becomes flesh. And we ought to remember that means Jesus comes as a human being who is tied to the whole cosmic story, whose body was made up of atoms formed inside stars, just like our bodies. The incarnation joins God's love, not just to humanity, but to the whole story of the universe. And perhaps such an interconnected universe where the old stuff of long-gone stars now makes up our bodies is exactly what we should expect from a God who intends to bring together and to reconcile all things in Christ, as it says in Ephesians 1:10, where we hear that God's promise is to gather up all things in Christ, things in heaven and things on earth. All things are joined together in God's ongoing creative activity, and they are also joined together in God's saving promise. The present calling of the church, of course, is to witness to that promise by consistent action toward justice and toward healing for all of creation, at least for the part of creation that we can affect. The large galaxy in this picture is about 50 million light years away. So the light left there after the dinosaurs had gone extinct, and the mammals had just started to become more prevalent on Earth. And that was thanks to another connection that we have to the rest of the universe, namely that asteroid that hit the Earth, wiped out the dinosaurs, and made room for mammals like us. Underneath that big galaxy, you see several smaller fuzzy spots. Those are more distant galaxies, and those are 500 million light years away. So the light left them before even the first land animals had evolved on Earth, and that light traveled at 186,000 miles every second since that time to reach us. The scale of the universe does bring us some humility, and I think that that's usually a pretty good thing. But I think that it can also help us to realize the wonderful gift of being creators, creatures that are able to reflect upon God. Because as far as we know, we are the only part of creation that can wonder at itself and that can wonder at the Creator. So, unlike what my childhood pastor suspected a long time ago, I don't think that we are reduced to insignificance by this big story, any more than the writer of Psalm 8 thought that humans were insignificant when he stood under the night sky. Because we can understand ourselves as part of God's story of creation that now continues through us, through our vocation as God's people in the world, our vocation to be those who care for creation, who honor it, who wonder at it, and who love all of our neighbors in it. I have one more quote from Carl Sagan. Reflecting on the incomprehensible size of the universe, he said, quote, "For small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. The vastness is bearable only through love." For us, I think that that statement can point both to God's love that holds everything together, and it can point to the love that we in turn are called to live out in our corner of creation. If the universe starts to feel overwhelming and we start to feel very insignificant, we are called to remember the love that fills the whole thing. In recent years, astronomy has given us a rich story of the universe's formation and its growing complexity. Our faith means that we will tell that story, and we need to help our youth understand that story as a 14 billion year story of God's love. As the church, we can declare that in the galaxies and in the stars and in the collapsing clouds that give birth to new stars, like in this picture, in the cosmic self-giving of supernova, we in fact hear a story of God's love. We hear a story that is heading toward the healing of all things that God promises in Christ. We are called to appreciate the beauty of creation, and we are called as God's partners to engage in creating more beauty in the world. And we are called to lessen creation's groaning when we can. We are called to be instruments of God's own care for a creation to which we are profoundly connected. And we do so in the assurance that God loves it all, and God will bring it to full redemption. And I think that a sense of wonder at creation is foundational for that kind of hope. In the 16th century, there was an Italian monk named Giordano Bruno. More than a decade before Galileo first looked at the sky through a telescope and revolutionized our understanding of the universe, Bruno seemed to realize intuitively some rather remarkable things. For example, he said that since God is infinite, Therefore, God's creation must be infinite too, that there is no end to the universe. And that is something that many astronomers suggest today. Bruno also said that since the universe is infinite, it has no center. And so the center of the universe is not the earth, the way the church was still teaching in the 16th century, and the center wasn't the sun, as Copernicus had by then suggested. Bruno said, rightly as it turns out, that there is no center at all. And Bruno then said, that means that God is equally present everywhere. What a great theological conclusion from a little bit of astronomy. If the big universe makes us start to feel small and distant from God, then maybe instead the universe can remind us that there in fact is no center and God is everywhere. Bruno also said there must be other worlds, other planets orbiting the stars too, maybe with life on them, because God is just that big. And at least the other planets is something that we have confirmed in just the past couple of decades. And when his ideas were critiqued as unbelievable, Bruno's response was to say, your idea of God is too small. I think that's a marvelous line from Bruno. Now, Bruno's story doesn't end very well. For a while, he taught at the Lutheran University at Wittenberg, but the Lutherans eventually excommunicated him, not so much for his astronomy, but for some very unorthodox ideas he had about the Holy Trinity. And in the end, he returned to Rome, and that was an unfortunate decision because when he got there, they burned him as a heretic. My point in retelling Bruno's story is not to suggest at all that contemplating the universe might turn us into heretics, but that contemplating the universe might help us think bigger thoughts about God. Without stopping to wonder at the universe, the chances are pretty good that our ideas about God will be too small. Of course, our ideas about God are always too small, but an awareness of the big universe can help, I think, and that sense of wonder at it all can be a place where we nurture, both in ourselves and in the youth of our congregations, nurture a healthy integration of our faith with the amazing world in which we live. Here at the end of what I had prepared to say, I want to shift gears just for a couple of minutes and make a few comments about how you might explore this sense of wonder at creation with youth in your ministry. There is a wealth of material.
Sorry.
Sorry?
Just as you are doing that, I just want to encourage anyone who has any questions, this is a good time to type them in so we have them when you're done.
Great, thank you. I want to remind you that there's a wealth of material on the internet. Plenty of that material would deal with the depths of the universe. The slides that you've been seeing are ones that I've taken, but there's this thing called the Hubble Space Telescope you've heard of, and the Hubble Space Telescope has probably been the most successful science project ever in terms of inspiring people. And those pictures are readily available online. The second thing I would mention is that no matter where you live, there is probably an amateur astronomy club nearby. Go on the internet and search for an astronomy club, and you're going to find one close to you. Those clubs hold public events where you and your youth group maybe could go and attend and look through their telescopes. Most amateur astronomers are delighted to share those views with others. The clubs would probably also be delighted to send a couple of people and their telescopes to your event. You would need to supply the theological conversation around that viewing for your youth, either before the viewing or after it. But for many people, I think that sort of event might be the first time to actually see parts of the universe through a telescope, and that can be pretty wonderful. And especially if you go to the club's event, that might be the first time for a lot of people to see a dark, star-filled sky away from the lights of a city. So
Awesome.
my,
So
my point here at the end is that I hope you actually give the youth a chance to go out and experience something beyond the earth and let them wonder in faith at that.
wonderful. So, say you have an amateur astronomer come to some sort of event that you are holding.
Mhm.
How do you start that theological conversation? Like, could you give some example verses and questions that you could pose with a group of eighth grade boys just to get
Yeah.
people started into that conversation? Obviously, they'll follow the curiosity, but how does someone start?
I think that what I would probably do is have a session, whether it's the same day or maybe a week before, with the youth. And I would look at a couple of the texts that were a part of the presentation today. I'd look at Psalm 8,
Hmm.
and I'd look at Genesis 1, and maybe
Hmm.
with Genesis 1 particularly, talk about how that is poetic in its format, and um, and then uh, talk about how looking at creation can inspire praise from us, and that seems to be what happened in Genesis 1. Um, might also look at the closing chapters of Job,
Hmm.
where God speaks to Job in this really long speech that talks about all the amazing and strange and wonderful things about creation and the world, and that becomes part of Job's um, coming face to face with the mystery of God. And I'm sure there are a lot of, not sure there are a lot of answers there for Job, but there's mystery that's important. And so maybe I'd draw on Job a little bit. Um, I might ask the youth where they see God as the creator still doing things in the world around them.
Hmm.
See if they realize that God is still at work in those ways.
So that could go wider than astronomy. That can
Oh
be,
yeah, I think so.
yeah.
I think so. I mean, you might ask some other priming questions like, has anybody ever been out in the dark, really away from the city?
Mhm.
Have they ever looked through a telescope? That sort of thing. But I think that somewhere before, or maybe, yeah, I think before that discussion, I would want to have them start thinking about what does it mean when we say God is the creator? It means that God made all these really big, far away, long ago things, but it means God is still creating now. And I would want to get them thinking about that.
So it could tie into the lesson on the first article of the Apostles'
Oh,
Creed.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, the other thing that comes to mind, and I'm not sure I've got a specific way to get at this,
Mhm.
um, but a large part of what I've talked about today has been how God has been at work and continues to be at work in very natural ways, um, through the sort of normal stuff of physics and the stuff of the world. And it seems to me that not just the Lutheran tradition, but the Lutheran tradition does have some deep resources to talk about that. In our sacramental theology, we talk about how God works through bread and wine and water, very ordinary things to be active in our lives. And I think that those are the ways that the young people in our congregations, um, at that age of 6, 7, 8, ninth grade, are starting to think about God active in their lives and active in the world through very earthy, normal things like friends and their
Mhm.
families and their congregations and maybe service projects in their communities. And if we can help the youth tie how God is at work in the processes of the universe and making new stars and recycling star stuff, and help them to see that God is at work in their lives in those very um, sort of ordinary earthly ways, that may help them make connections between their faith and the rest of their lives. That connection that I said at the beginning, I'm afraid we're not helping them with very much.
Right, thank you. And is there, I mean, obviously people can ask around in word of mouth, but is there like a national organization of astronomers or something to Google to find people nearby, or what are the words in Google?
Yeah. There is an organization called the Astronomical League
Okay.
that would have a list of astronomy clubs across the country. But I suspect if you typed into a Google search um, astronomy club and then your city
Mm-hmm.
or your state,
Church nearby.
it'll
Yes.
pop. That'll pop.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sometimes, people go into a new field and they're just not putting the right words in, and Google's
Yeah,
not.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Nina is wondering, how might you engage this topic with ideas around stewardship of creation? And she's asking, especially in the context of Standing Rock and its ties to
Mm,
creation.
wow. Um, what a great idea. Great question. Um, I think that I would tie this into the astronomy sense of wonder in this way. That when we start to look at the things I've presented today, it all is very, very far away. And
Mhm.
that's part of the point. Um, but but that what we are called, as I said, is to be stewards in our little part of this wonderful creation. We can't and we shouldn't have inflated egos to think that we are the center of all of this or that we can do anything about all of this. God has to be in charge. But we are called to be stewards of our little piece of it.
Mm.
And if Psalm 8 can look at the stars and they can become a reason to praise God and a reason to see God's glory and a reason to think about what we are called to be as God's servants, then I think we could use that in our little corner and say, if we look at Standing Rock, what needs to happen so that people can look at that and say, there we see God at work, there we see God's glory. When we look at that, what do we think we're called to do as servants of God at that point? So maybe realizing that we're not responsible for the whole big thing, but we are called to be caretakers of our little corner of it. Might be a way of seeing um, not just a sense of, how do I say this? A sense of stewardship that involves an element of beauty and appreciation and wonder to it. And I think sometimes we're missing that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I do have some closing announcements, but I want to give you the opportunity for the final word. What's your parting advice for us?
Oh, I wasn't expecting parting
Ah,
words. That's great. Um, I just think that in terms of the resources to help the young people in our congregations connect their faith with the marvels of this world. We've never lived in a time that has resources so readily available to us. Um, and I encourage everyone to explore those and make use of them. There is one more resource I want to mention if I've got time to do
good.
this.
Yes, you do.
Um,
Yes.
oh, where is it? I had it on a piece of paper here, and now I've lost it. Oh, I hate it when that happens.
I've
Um,
done that. Don't worry.
yeah, it is. Oh, it's something connected with the ELCA. It's the Lutheran Alliance for Faith, Science, and Technology. The
Hmm.
Lutheran Alliance for Faith, Science, and Technology. And you might find a lot of resources there, not just about astronomy, but sort of expanding our frame of reference in general when we talk about creation and being stewards of it.
Wonderful. So Lutheran Alliance for Faith, Science, and Technology, we'll put a link to that on the Facebook page and we'll tweet it. If you're
Great.
watching this after the fact, you may have already seen it on the page below the recording. So that link will be there along with anything else that seems to feel present and connected to this. So thank you, Brian, for being with us.
Thank you.
It's been so fun. So this webinar, along with all the others in the series, has been recorded and archived, as I just mentioned. It's at the Practice Discipleship website, which you can find at practicediscipleship.org. .org. So please download it, use it, share it. This is not like you have to be a professional Lutheran in order to listen. This is widely available, and we actively want you to share this with anyone inside or outside your congregation who you feel could benefit. You can also download from the Practice Discipleship site videos, curriculum from previous years to use anywhere you would like. The website will remain active and available to all as we have this hiatus during 2017, so you can use it on into the future. You can also find event dates on the network app for iPhone and Android. This free app gives you anytime access to these videos, network news, calendar of events, an interactive prayer wall, and much more. I also mentioned Facebook and Twitter, so if you are not already following, please search for Practice Discipleship Initiative on Facebook, or at Twitter, we're at ELCAPD. These pages, along with the website, will continue to be available as a resource to you. Tuesday, November 15th is the third Tuesday conversation, and this month's conversation is led by Reverend Sharon and Reverend Tim Taylor. The Taylors are pastors in North Carolina, so we have South Carolina on this webinar and North Carolina on the third Tuesday conversation. They've been leading workshops for many years on isms, so racism, sexism, ageism, to help us see more clearly how to make a difference one person at a time. The annual ELCA Youth Ministry Network's extravaganza will be January 20 to 23 at the Galt House Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky. For more information and to register, visit ext17.org. And incidentally, ext17 is also the hashtag we use during the event to share bits of what is going on. Please, please attend in person and be tweeting, but if for some reason you can't, follow that hashtag over the weekend. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you in Louisville, and we hope to see you at other events and conversations in the future. Have a great day. Goodbye.